Well, a lot of advocacy tends to take place in meetings. Sometimes the meetings are one-to-one and sometimes they're in a group. But many advocates experience meetings in a very unsatisfactory way, frustrated by the lack of progress or the problems of getting problems solved and decisions being made. So this evening we want to have a discussion with Bob Lee, who's going to talk about some of the dimensions of attending meetings and being more successful in meetings. So Bob, I wonder if you'd tell us about what kind of things an advocate might be able to do that would help prepare them better for the meetings they're going to attend.
Mm. Well, I think the first thing to really be aware of is that in a meeting and in many other situations where people are doing advocacy, that they are affected by what is happening in the unconscious. In other words, they might have a conscious awareness of something, but they are still affected unconsciously. And I'll go into that, in more detail as we go along. I think the next thing to be aware of is that when you organise a meeting, you have effectively negotiated and booked a person's time. So if you've negotiated for an hour of a person's time that you want to meet and discuss some issues with, then that hour should be yours. And one of the things that is happening more frequently lately is that that person that you're speaking to often gets interrupted, called away, and very often the mobile phone rings. And what's happening there is that you've gone to the trouble of negotiating for that person's time, you've booked them for that time, and you've been interrupted. And that, I think, is unfair. And I think that's something that an advocate can arrange before the meeting starts, to have an awareness from everyone there that we won't be disturbed during this meeting. So we'll turn our mobile phones off and there won't be anyone coming in and calling you away for some urgent matter. I think the next thing to be aware of in preparing for a meeting is the important need to have independent records of what takes place in the meeting. Now, often you might be offered a situation where a person will take minutes. But it might be also in your interest to consider having someone independent that is on your side, that you feel confident about the minutes that are taken. Many advocates will tell me that they're often presented with minutes from a meeting that bear very little resemblance to what they remember was being discussed. And that can be helped by having a person that you take along that is there for you, that is able to provide independent notes and records of what actually took place in the meeting. And that person also can take on other functions like being a support person for you. I think the next thing is that people preparing for a meeting should prepare an agenda. I mean, no matter how experienced we are, we really need to have a list of issues for discussion prepared so that we know how we're going to address those issues, and most importantly, to make sure that the most important issues are actually addressed and not, left until later, or we run out of time, we can't discuss them. So there's a couple of things about this. It's a good idea to list the issues, think about how much time you would like to give those issues, and write that down so that right from the outset you can have an idea about, I'm going to be spending 15 minutes on this issue. I think the other thing that's to that is sticking to the agenda. It is quite common for a meeting to go off track, and that often happens because the person you are meeting with, or the people you are meeting with, it might be in their interest to throw in some new issues that you haven't prepared for. If you are ready for that, then you can simply say, well, I'd be very happy to talk about that. We can add that to the agenda and deal with that at the end of the meeting if we've got time. And if we don't have time, I'd be happy to make another time for another meeting to deal with that. But meantime, this is the agenda and these are the issues that I want to discuss.
Do you think, Bob, there are other things that can take a meeting off track, and anything that an advocate can do about that?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that we need to consider whose meeting it is. If you've been asked to attend a meeting by someone else, then you're really there in response, and therefore it's their meeting. And so what you're doing is, responding to the issues that another person is raising. But with advocates, most of the time, they are the ones that have initiated the meeting and requested it. And so therefore, they need to have a consciousness that it is their meeting, not someone else's. And that they need to control the meeting, control the issues, and control the agenda. Sometimes meetings are a struggle of wills. That there are many people who have experienced that while there's a discussion going on, there's a bit of a struggle going on for control. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think that an advocate, if they are serious about being effective in their advocacy, remember, they're there because they're wanting to represent the best interests of a vulnerable person, and therefore, if a struggle is necessary, well, we might have a bit of a struggle. But once again, it's the consciousness that you need to have that prepare for the fact that you might find yourself in a struggle of wills. If it's your meeting, you need to really affirm with the person or people you're meeting with that it is your meeting, and we'll stick to the agenda that you have. I've already said that often new ideas and new issues might be thrown in. It's really important to make it clear that you can deal with those at the end of the meeting or at another meeting.
Yeah, that's great. So for meetings to be successful, who needs to be there?
Well, I think there's two things to ask here. And the first one is, who is not there who should be? And the second one is, who is there who shouldn't be? So the first one is, when you plan to have a meeting, the whole purpose of having a meeting is to discuss issues with a person, a particular person that is usually a decision maker. Now, it is quite common, and many people will say that this has been their experience, to battle with traffic and find parking and arrive at a meeting to be told that the person that you've arrived to speak to is not available. Sometimes it's because they're a very important person, but other times it might be genuinely that they're not available. And you will be expected to take your meeting with someone else. Often that person is not a decision maker. And now, that's something that you have to think about. Sometimes you might think that, well, I wanted to meet with that particular person. If they're not available, a decision is not going to be made here. It might be better for me to just postpone the meeting and have it at another time. It also makes a powerful statement that you are prepared to postpone a meeting, do it at another time, which is a great inconvenience for you, but it makes a powerful statement about your seriousness, that you're not going to be fobbed off with someone else, that you plan to have the meeting with that particular person because they're a decision maker and you want that to happen. So I believe that that makes a powerful statement by the advocate that, no, this is what I want and this is what I need to have. The next thing is, who is there who shouldn't be there? Well, it's also quite common to arrive at a meeting and find that there are surprise guests there that you never invited. It's your meeting and there are people there that you haven't invited. Now, it's quite reasonable for an advocate who is in a meeting to inquire about who these extra people are and why they are there. Now, sometimes you'll get ridiculous situations where extra people have simply been brought in to be some support for the person you're meeting. Now, it's unnecessary, and if you find that after you inquired about, what role people have in the meeting, why they are there, who invited them, you might even find that you need to suggest that they don't really need to be there and they might like to leave. I've certainly experienced that myself. And I've heard about situations where, the person in the next door office has been brought in to make the person you're meeting with more comfortable. That's what I meant about a struggle of wills. Sometimes these things happen, and the purpose is to throw you off guard. But if you are prepared for things like that to happen, then you know what to do and you are not thrown off guard.
That's great. I remember the Vietnam peace talks involved for many months the shape of the table.
That's right.
I think so. Very interesting indeed. Bob, sometimes people you arrive and you're offered hospitality. What should we make of that?
Well, I think this is a really good example of what I was talking about before, about the unconscious impact. Even if you consciously believe that nothing will affect you, you can do whatever you like in a meeting and you're in control. The whole thing about hospitality is that it might be genuinely offered as a person wanting to make you feel at ease and be comfortable, but it will still have an impact. And the impact is that if you accept hospitality from a person, then you have a certain obligation to that person. Now, the last thing that an advocate needs is to be in a meeting carrying with them a sense of obligation to the person that they're advocating with. I think this is a really important thing. It's a small price to pay, and I think the best thing to do is to decline hospitality. You can decline it gracefully, but it's better not to run the risk of putting yourself into a situation where unconsciously your sense of obligation might impact on your effectiveness as an advocate. The best time to have a cup of coffee and something to eat is after the meeting. Outside, where you can debrief and talk with an ally that's come to the meeting with you.
Bob, are there any issues about where the meeting should be held?
Yes, I think it's something really important to think about. Often, when an advocate requests a meeting, there is an assumption that the meeting will be held in, a bureaucrat's office or the manager's office, something like that. And as I said, often that means struggling with traffic and finding parking and getting yourself to a place. And already, you're in a situation where you might be at a bit of a disadvantage, uncomfortable, hot, whatever. I think what advocates need to remember is that if they are requesting a meeting, it's quite reasonable for them to also think about where the meeting takes place, whether it's in a place that suits them, for many different reasons. Now, you can accept the offer to attend an office and go and have the meeting there, and that's fine, but when you do that, you run the risk of putting yourself in a situation where you're at a disadvantage. You might decide that you would like to have the meeting at your place. I know many people who, not everyone is comfortable, but many people are very comfortable to have someone come to their place. Now, the advantage here is it's your place and you are the one that's inviting another person in. And remember what I said about hospitality, declining hospitality. Well, if it's your place, go ahead, bring out the cakes, bring out the scones. Because in that case, you offering hospitality is going to work in your favour. That is not, not everyone would want to do that, but for me, it means that you can go ahead and offer hospitality without it meaning that you are the one that has a sense of obligation. And I think that a lot of people, particularly if they're advocates, they might be family members, they might be just ordinary people, remember that advocates might hardly ever do this in their lives, while the people they are meeting with might be very experienced at being in meetings and know exactly what to do, exactly how to manage what's going on. So I think an advocate needs all the advantages that they can get. So for some people, they might consider the idea of having a meeting in their territory. The other situation, of course, is the idea of a neutral place. And that might be a cafe or an office in a community centre, somewhere where it's not either your territory or mine. And that can be very effective, particularly in one-to-one situations. So in the end, it's one of these things that people need to think about before the meeting. Where am I going to be most comfortable having this meeting? And I might say to the person, it's very difficult for me to come to your office. I appreciate your offer. What I'd like you to do is come out to my home and we can have the meeting there. So I think that think about the place that suits you, where you're going to feel comfortable with, and where you are more likely to feel in control of the meeting.
Most meetings are going to be held where parties are seated in relation to each other. So there are any factors around seating that an advocate would need to be aware of?
Yes, I think this is a really big issue, and it's often sort of not taken seriously by people. But I always think that if you want to see how important it is, have a look at what diplomats do. They would never dream of being in a situation where they're at different heights or any sort of disadvantage. Diplomats take great care to be in exactly the same situation, and so should we. They do that for a reason, and so should we. I think that it's quite common, for example, to be welcomed into an office and taken to the low, comfortable chair. Here, I've reserved this chair for you. It's nice and comfortable. You sit here. And then the person you're meeting with will bring over their office chair and literally sit over the top of you. Now, you might feel as though that doesn't impact on you at all, but the reality is unconsciously it does. You've got someone sitting higher than you, and therefore they're looking down at you and they are taking a dominating position. And as I say, advocates need to be very careful about not just accepting anything that's going to reduce their effectiveness in a meeting. So it's really important to at least sit at the same level. Now, I've been to meetings where people arrange chairs in a big circle and they all sit around and they always look very uncomfortable to me. But that's favoured by some people, and particularly groups of people that are really discussing things where there's no contention. But for me, the important thing is meetings really need to take place around a table for a few reasons. Number one is you've got a surface to write on, and that's really important. You need to be able to write notes and look at your papers and things like that. But the other one is that people, when they're sitting around a table, tend to be a lot closer to each other than they would be if they were sitting with nothing in between them. It's about personal space. If we've got something in between us, then we can sit comfortably a lot more closer to each other. Now, the other thing is the notion of where you sit to control a meeting. And a lot of people talk about sitting at the head of the table, and we've sort of grown up with ideas that the person that controls the meeting is at the head of the table. But that's actually not where you control a meeting. You control a meeting by sitting at one of the long sides of the table. In other words, sit at the side of the table. Where does the main person that you're meeting with sit? Well, if you have the opportunity and you get there early enough, you could request that person comes and sits next to you, because that is the best place. Because if they sit opposite you, then what you'll have is like the audience watching a ping pong game, backwards and forwards between the two people who are doing most of the talking. And therefore, if you've got the person you are doing most of the talking with right next to you, then that means the focus and the attention of the other people involved in the meeting is all in the same direction. You can enhance that by having a person that comes with you to a meeting to be just a note taker or a support person, and they can actually work to deflect the attention back to the two main people in the meeting. So it's not always possible to organise the seating like this, but sometimes you can do it if you get early, if you ask. And I use my very bad hearing as an excuse to ask a person to sit close to me so I can hear them. So what I would say is that the best arrangement for a typical meeting that might have half a dozen people, and that's quite common, would be to sit around a table with you on one of the long sides, the person that you're meeting with right beside you, to have someone opposite you, and the other people spread around. The other thing to think about is distraction. I have often gone into a room where there's a meeting taking place and found that there's a panel of people that I'm sitting on one side of the table, and there's a panel literally on the other side, and I am sitting with my back to an open door. So there's lots of opportunities for people to really undermine your effectiveness in what they do. If, on the other hand, you have the meeting where you make sure the door is closed, you make sure you're sitting in the best arrangement, then you're going to have a meeting that at least is on an even playing field.
Bob, these are terrific strategies for advocates to use as they go into a meeting. And I wonder if you finally might comment then, what are the outcomes like generally? I know that some of these strategies might not guarantee that every meeting is successful, but do you find that there is a difference even in the confidence of an advocate having these ideas in mind as opposed to an advocate that is basically oblivious to these kind of issues as they go to the meeting?
Well, first I would say that these ideas have come from the experiences of advocates over a long period of time that I've collected. And I've taken a great deal of interest in them. And the reason why people remember them is that they have felt that they've been effective. Certainly I had a long discussion with someone who was a consultant with the World Bank about how you sit around a table. And I figured that if that's something that he gets paid a lot of money to tell people about, it's something that I should take notice of. But I'll go back once again. I think that the really critical thing is for advocates to ensure that they have the best chance of being effective by preparing well for a meeting. And one of the best preparations is to have an understanding and to accept that no matter what we think, we will be affected by things that are happening by our unconscious. So if we accept food and refreshments, then we can't stop ourselves having that unconscious sense of obligation. And where we sit affects the way we behave through the unconscious. I think that is really the most important thing. But generally, these are ideas that other people have given me over the time, and I'm really interested in passing on to other people that might use them. I've had a couple of really good examples where I went and spoke to a group of mums and dads, hardly ever been to a meeting in their life, and I talked to them about sitting in low chairs, and I left the meeting with them, and then they rang me the next day, absolutely overwhelmed, because I was followed a quarter of an hour later by executives of this large organisation, and these people took them into the lounge room and sat them in the low lounge chairs, and then went and got the kitchen chairs and sat around them. And they said that it made all the difference in the world. They felt confident, and they felt as though they were in control of things. Well, I think for people who are at a disadvantage because of their inexperience, then that's a good thing.
Bob, that's excellent. Thank you very much. It's been very helpful.
My pleasure.